More and more people are discovering Defenders, Dr. Craig, especially because it is now live streaming and online. So many people from all over the world watch it and set their clocks by it, and even hopefully are availing themselves of the opportunity to use it as a kind of a curricula for their own Sunday schools and Bible study groups.
That's our desire. We're live streaming it so that folks who have a Sunday school class roughly the same hour can have a class where you don't need to have a teacher. We'll be the teacher for you. All you have to do is have the equipment set up with the internet connection, and you can begin your class with time of prayer and sharing or the other things you do in your Sunday school class, but then you connect to the live stream and you'll have a 20 to 25 minute lesson on Christian doctrine or apologetics. So we see this as a way of serving the church by providing good adult Sunday school education for churches. And of course, if you're in a time zone where the live stream doesn't connect with your local class, you can watch it privately, or you can avail yourself of the archive where the video of the lesson is archived at the website, reasonablefaith.org, and then you can watch it anytime.
Bill, I want to talk about two of the Defender series that are so popular right now, relevant in culture, and also because people are so interested in the series, and also what we're going to do in the future, what's coming up in Defender Series 3. But one of the things that has just captured the minds of so many people who go to Defenders is the Creation Evolution series, because it really surveys and is very thorough on what the differing views are, and in particular, how to view Genesis 1, how to view the book of Genesis and so on. Obviously, this was kind of an excursus, but obviously people are very interested in this.
Yes, they are, and it was because of that demand, so to speak, that I added this excursus to the section on doctrine of creation, which doesn't appear in Defenders Series 1. This is an additional element in Series 2. And what I wanted to do in this section was not to defend any particular interpretation of Genesis 1. Indeed, I don't know what is the right interpretation of Genesis 1. I'm still uncertain as to how to understand that chapter. But I wanted to help people see the diversity and the range of options that are available to Bible-believing Christians today. Far too many people think that only the literal 6 consecutive 24-hour day creation view is biblical. And I wanted them to see that biblically faithful evangelical theologians have taken a wide range of interpretations of that passage.
One of the interpretations is from John Walton, and you interacted with his work briefly on this. He's at Wheaton. And,
yes, a professor of Old Testament.
Also a member of BioLogos, which doesn't take a position on many of these things, but does try to interact on a scholarly level with these issues, including Genesis. John Walton's view, in a nutshell, what is...
Well, in a nutshell, he calls it functional creation. And what he says is that Genesis 1 is not a description of the creation of these entities, that is to say, bringing the entities into being. It's a description of God's specification of their functions.
Kind of like a house can be a structure sitting there, but it's not a home if a family doesn't live there and so on.
Right, and he uses the analogy of a restaurant. He said, when was the restaurant founded? When did the restaurant begin to exist? Was it when the building was first built, or rather is it when it began to function as a restaurant? And he would say the restaurant began to exist when its function was specified, not simply when the building was in place.
Does he try to bridge a gap here between young Earth and old Earth and theistic evolutionists? I mean,
in a way
where does
he
this...
does, because at least as I understand him, and one always has to add that caveat, as I understand him, it sounds to me like he is saying that this period of 7 days in which God specified the functions of things was literal, that it literally happened over 7 consecutive 24-hour days, that God laid out the functions that these things were to play. But he thinks these things all existed prior to that.
So the earth is older than 6,000 years then?
Yeah, right. There were, as I said in the lesson, he says the sun was shining, the animals were going about, all of these things were there just fine, but their functions hadn't been specified yet. So what you have in Genesis 1 is not the description of the creation of the seas and the land and the animals and the vegetation. Rather, it's God's just saying, this will be for this purpose.
Bill, we have a piece of audio here from Dr. Walton that we want to listen to from our friend Nick Peters, who got so excited about this whole thing that he called Dr. Walton on his radio blog and ran this critique that you offered past him. Now, the answer was brief, but let's interact a little bit and hear what Dr. Walton has to say in response to your criticism.
Tried to apply Aristotelian categories to what I was talking about. And my very point is that we can't apply Aristotelian or Enlightenment or modern post-Darwinian categories when we're thinking about the ancient world. So he did the very thing that I was saying that I didn't think we ought to do. So I had a problem with that. Secondly, he didn't seem to understand what I meant by functions. I'm not talking about scientific functions or material functions. I'm talking about functioning for people, working for us. Again, you can't have something functioning as a home if people aren't living there. And it's that kind of functions that I'm talking about. It's not that the sun wasn't shining or the plants weren't growing. It's not that I'm suggesting those things weren't happening. It's rather that now they're going to function for people who have been moved into this home, so to speak.
Okay. Now, the first thing is that Dr. Walton, as you point out, makes a very much a case that you can't impose things on the text that the original author did not intend or that the original audience would not have been able to receive, and so on. And he accuses you of doing that, of applying Aristotelian and scientific jargon and Aristotelian logic and scientific jargon and stuff on the text, and you can't do that, he says.
Apart from the fact that the use of Aristotelian categories can hardly be called an imposition of modern categories on this ancient text, right? Apart from that point, what I was doing was trying to analyze Walton's concepts, not the text. It was Dr. Walton's concepts that I was trying my best to understand. And what I was saying is that what he refers to as material creation, I think, is best understood as what Aristotle called efficient causation. And this is confusing because when you talk about material creation, that sounds like the creation of the material, of the physical stuff.
Matter.
Yes. And that's not what Walton, I think, really means when he talks about material creation, and yet that confusion is engendered by his terminology. So what I'm trying to do is simply conceptually clarify the types of causation that are at issue here, not imposing things on ancient texts, but trying to understand the concepts that Walton is using in his analysis. And I'm suggesting that by not having a clear differentiation between efficient causation and material causation, as Aristotle did, Walton is blending these together and comes up with this thing called material creation, which is, I think, very confusing and leads him to be confused.
He continues.
And so I felt like he totally misunderstood what I meant by functions and material, and his critique, I think, demonstrated that.
It sounds like even in his teaching on your series that has you as having these animals sitting around, not able to do anything, but lo and behold, God gives a function, and all of a sudden things start working. Was that the impression you got as well?
That's the impression I got, but that's clearly not what I'm saying.
When he talked about the Aristotelian logic, what he said is you're confusing the material cause with the final cause, but it seems to me the problem is that you're not talking about language at all.
Right, I'm not talking about cause at all. Now, he assumes that if you're talking about creation, you're talking about cause. He's bringing modern categories into an ancient conversation.
Okay, your thoughts?
It's always so easy to respond to a criticism by saying that the person didn't understand me. And here I'm tempted to respond in the same way. I don't think Walton understood me. Did he think that my critique was that on his view, the sun wasn't shining, that the animals were frozen like mannequins, not moving about and functioning biologically before God specified the functions? I don't think if you look at my podcast, I attributed anything so absurd as that to Walton. Rather, what I understood Walton's view to be and what I was criticizing is the view that in Genesis chapter 1, you don't actually have the creation of these entities related. Rather, the sun, the dinosaurs, the vegetation, everything already existed prior to verse 1 and was going along quite well, functioning biologically, if you will. But then, on his view, what happens with Genesis 1 is God starts to specify the purposes or the functions that these things will fulfill. So I don't think I've misunderstood his view. That's the way I represented his view, and I think that is his view. And my argument or criticism is that it's preposterous. I was pretty unsympathetic. It seems to me it's a preposterous interpretation of Genesis chapter 1, that this doesn't involve the actual creation of the entities and is merely a specification of their functions with regard to people, with regard to human society.
Wow. You know, Series 3 is about to come up, Bill, and you'll start over on this material. And maybe next time when you get to this excursus, we can say further things about Walton's view.
Well, I may have a chance to interact with him at one of these BioLogos conferences, and I would welcome it. I want to interact with folks who are on the other side and with whom I disagree.
We'll do a podcast and see if we can get the functions straight and the definitions of functions. Another thing that is going on right now in Defenders is the end times, the doctrine of the end times, or eschatology. Now, everyone is interested in this, but Bill, as we record here, the culture has gone crazy. Rapture fever is what the press calls it. It is just a fascination with the rapture. And at least 4 movies, completely secular. In fact, some of them I wouldn't recommend seeing at all, that I wouldn't even watch because they're so mocking. And, they have obscene and really terrible. But at least 4 have dealt with the rapture. And so everybody's familiar with the rapture. We have the forthcoming Left Behind movie that's coming out. It's got some big name stars in it this time as opposed to last time. And also there's a series going on HBO called The Leftovers. And it is a drama about life after a rapture-like event has taken place. It's very popular. So this is everywhere. You survey the rapture among other end-time views in this series.
Yes.
Let me just say, Bill, we tend in evangelicalism to just kind of assume the rapture.
I think a lot of us do. In fact, Kevin, I was rather amused in looking through my notes for this section of the Defenders class. I found my old notes from when I first began to teach this years ago, and in it includes a diagram with the rapture in it, in my own hand. This was my own view, that Christ would come back and rapture the church out of the world prior to the final and decisive return of Christ. And it was only as I began to study this issue further for myself, rather than accept what I'd just always been taught, that I was really quite astonished to see, Kevin, not merely that there is slim biblical evidence for this view, but that rather there is no biblical evidence for this view. The rapture is never referred to in the New Testament. There is no passage that talks about the rapture. Now, that may surprise some of our listeners, but what I would invite them to do is to look at what Paul says in 1st and 2nd Thessalonians and compare it to what Jesus says in the Olivet Discourse in Mark 13. And I think what you'll find is that Paul is talking there about the same thing that Jesus was talking about, namely the second coming of Christ, at which time the dead would be raised, the elect would be gathered, and Christ would come to establish his kingdom. It's not about a rescue operation to snatch the church out of the world prior to the second coming of Christ.
Now, when you say the rapture is not found in Scripture, you're not talking about the word rapture, because that's just a convenient doctrine.
Sure, that's
You're talking
irrelevant
about
whether the
doctrine.
word is. I mean
Yeah.
that the doctrine or the concept is not found.
Sure.
In fact, there is the word that says that the saints will be taken up. That word is there, and that's usually thought of as the rapture. But what I'm saying is that doesn't refer to this return of Jesus prior to his second coming to evacuate the church. That is talking about what Jesus speaks of in Mark 13 in the Olivet Discourse when he says, when the Son of Man returns visibly and decisively, that he will send the angels out to the four corners of the earth and gather the elect, and they will rise from the dead, and then the elect that are there will be gathered to meet Christ and welcome him when he returns.
You know, a lot of people in the class, and you'll hear, do believe the pre-tribulational rapture, and they ask a lot of questions. There's a lot of interaction.
Yes.
Intelligent interaction in Defenders.
Yes.
It sounds like that. And so
that's
you'll
one
get
of
a
the
full
strengths
view.
of this class. We've got Baptists, we've got Catholics, we've got all sorts of folks in the class with a diversity of opinions, and they're all welcome to share their views, and we discuss these issues.
From a practical standpoint, Dr. Craig, with all this, what we call rapture fever, an obsession with it in movies and so on in the culture, what's a good reaction? How do we handle that as far as sharing our faith? How can we parlay that into opportunities?
I don't know, Kevin. I've not
Anything?
really thought of that, since I don't think that there is such a thing as the rapture. I guess if you meet a non-believer who, say, has been to one of these movies and is troubled by it, you could use that perhaps as an opportunity to talk to him about whether or not he's ready to meet Christ. If Christ were to return, is he ready to meet God? Does he have confidence that his sins are forgiven? So you can certainly use the notion that Christ is coming again as a means of emphasizing the urgency of the gospel.
Perhaps one can say that the pre-tribulational rapture is one view among a handful of views on how everything is going to happen in the end, and that there are Orthodox Christians who don't hold to the rapture necessarily. If anybody has their doubts about the rapture,
it's worse than that, though. I mean, I really think that, as I say, the rapture is a view which has no scriptural support whatsoever, and it is unknown virtually in the history of the Christian church until about 1827, when it was invented by John Darby. So this type of theology is often called Darbyism, which makes it sound like a cult almost. And I prefer not to refer to it as Darbyism, lest it sound cultic. But honestly, Kevin, this is a strange strain of Christianity that has become real popular in certain circles in the United States.
The Left Behind series is one of the most popular series in publication history, Bill. It is titanic. It is huge, So it really is a juggernaut. It's a view that is just kind of held very uncritically. But at any rate, I would offer that you don't want the non-believer or the non-Christian to be bogged down in things like eschatology when you really need to get them to Jesus and who He is,
Sure,
and that He is coming back.
Right,
That's what you were trying to say.
Yes, that's the central truth, is that Christ is coming again.
But boy, is this ever going to keep the debate hot among the Christian church. This is an in-house debate.
Yes,
with
it
this
is.
movie coming out and with everything going on right now, might be a good time to go through Defenders and get the various surveys that are going on. Yeah. Now, Bill, wouldn't you like to just be raptured and yanked out of here before the tribulation?
That's what one of the ladies in the class said to me in Defenders. She says, well, when the rapture occurs, how did she put it? She said,
I'll be telling you, I told you so.
Yeah, she
or
said,
she'll grab you by the back of the neck or something.
I'd be telling you that I told you so, except I'll be glorified. I'll be sanctified, and so I wouldn't do it.